Hello and welcome to the Brown Perspective. Today we're going to talk about the elite college admission controversy that happened this week. And here is my partner in crime, El Mero Mero Romero.
Hello, hello. Looking forward to it.
It's going to be a good conversation. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to recap some of um, the information, the key information about the scandal. Then we will try to cover these important topics. So the first one is the reaction that we've seen to the scandal, and that leads us to a conversation on affirmative action, which we hope to be able to also discuss privilege and the concept of legacy and other thoughts surrounding this scandal. As some of the listeners may know, the Brown perspective, part of it, the title, part of it is because both Romero and I are Latinos, and we wanted to provide that unique lens in our conversations. But the other main factor is that he and I met and became really good friends at Brown University. So this is a topic that we want to discuss because as students of color, as students who came from humble uh, humble beginnings and they got a chance to study at a great school like Brown University, we 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 feel that we have a lot to say on this regard. So Romero, would you like to go over the recap of what happened?
Yeah, sure. Before I jump into the recap, I wanted to add to your intro that not only are we Latinos that went to Brown University, but we have also been on the receiving end of some of those accusations that we are the type of students that got into those universities because of affirmative action. So we can definitely get into that as well.
That's right.
So, quick recap here because this is a huge scandal, and you all.
Something happened with the sound.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Yeah, that was weird. Maybe when I moved, I touched the cable here and it disconnected it. Okay, that's fine then. So I'll have to edit that part out. It's okay. Did you stop hearing me? I'm just gonna start from the beginning again.
Yeah, because I automatically went
Yeah.
silent.
So this is a pretty big scandal. 8 universities, 11 college employees, 45 students, and 6 million paid directly or indirectly to college employees. And the one thing that this nice summary provided by the Chronicle of Higher Education, by the way, the one thing that you don't see in this summary here is this part, which is a company called The Key, I believe based out of Florida. And The Key was run by William Singer, Rick Singer, and it
Hmm.
bribed officials at college entrance examination companies to allow third parties to take the students' tests for them. That is when I saw that part, that was the part that to me it took it to a whole new level because I've always had a feeling that all of these schools, to some form or another, they're always doing something like this, especially the athletics departments, where they're trying to find creative ways to allow athletes that may not necessarily have the grades. And even right now, these are the schools that were charged, but I'm sure there's probably others, and they're probably going to lay low for a while. So
Yeah.
who do we have? We have University of Southern California, and I believe most of them, more than 2 dozen. So I believe more than about half of the total students are from USC. And then you have the senior associate athletic director, the former coach of the women's soccer team, former assistant coach, head coach of the water polo. How much money? 1.3 million, 350,000 to a private soccer club controlled by Koshro Shaheen and Young, and those are probably up here. And
Mm.
then 250,000 paid to the water polo team, and that's just USC. And then you have the other schools like Yale University with similar charges, but here you only have one student. You have Georgetown University, at least 12 students, and then University of California, Los Angeles. So we have two schools from California. This one only has two students though. And then you have Wake Forest, Stanford University, University of Texas at Austin, and the University of San Diego. So at a high level, that's that's what you're seeing. And you saw this blew up in the media last week when it happened, and of course, huge reactions and different perspectives and different points of view. The one you talked about was the reaction on Twitter, especially from non-white students that for a long time have been saying, wait a minute, you guys are focusing on the wrong side of this. You guys are always trying to point out that it's the Latinos that are getting in because of affirmative action, but you always turn a blind eye to these type of cases where privilege is really a bigger factor. We have the legacy system in the universities, and now this cheating as well.
Yeah, and I think what you pointed out with the exam, like having a third party take the exam, is it sort of goes at the heart of the idea that you get to a university based on your own work. So the whole meritocracy system, right? That you deserve to be there, but in fact, you had somebody else who took the exams or who really help you get grades, which obviously is something that at least I, as an immigrant student applying to college, did not have, and just I was just learning about the process as I went from my peers. And even though my mom really wanted me to go to school, she was not in a position to advise me because she had not gone through the system. She did not have the money to to buy me tutors or classes and things like that. So I think, like you said, part of the strong reaction is for all of the low income or mid income students who and also if you're a person of color who has dealt with the stigma of affirmative action, right? Oh, you're just here because of affirmative action.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And beyond beyond the resources that privileged people have to take these tests, well, these guys decided to take it to another level. They said, you know what, Kaplan and all of these other resources that we can throw to our kids, those weren't good enough because they tried them, and the
Hmm.
students, it didn't help. It didn't improve their ACT scores. So that's probably how this the key company was marketing to the parents, like, hey, tried Kaplan, tried all these other programs, and still you can't get your son or daughter to improve their SAT scores. Let's just have somebody else take the test for them. What I was thinking about this, as I thought about this, is, do you think the students were aware of this? I don't think the students, maybe not, but think about a student receiving their test results in the mail and getting a 1500. They're like, wait, whoa, I'm a lot better than I actually thought I was. There must have
Yeah, I
been
think
some
some of that. I
reaction.
think that was some of the controversy, right? Like I believe a few of the students were onto it, um, and I believe, and now obviously they found out. So it'll be interesting to see how they respond. Particularly, I think there was one person who's the daughter of a couple of the celebrities that were involved to see how they react to it because now that's out there and how are they're going to decide to move forward.
Yeah, she isn't she the daughter of the woman from that family sitcom Full House?
Full House.
That's I forget her name because she has, but let me look her up so we can. USC scandal.
Yeah, because I know she did a because part of her obviously now she is a social media influencer. So apparently she did a
Yeah, it
video
is. Yeah.
talking about her reaction.
Well, she already. I was reading a headline this morning that she's already dropped out of USC. You can
Oh wow.
imagine. You can imagine how embarrassing and everything that she must be going through right now as a result of this. I don't know if she knew about it, but it's a huge hit for her to the point where she has to drop out and think about it. Like, no amount of money that you have in the bank and no amount of celebrity status is gonna shield you from the public shaming that she's experiencing, because she has her
Hmm.
circle of friends, her circle of people that she knows, and yeah, she must be going through a lot. And yeah, you gotta just at least acknowledge that despite having all this money and all this privilege, it's still she's still a human being, and she's still gonna go through this. Even the mom as well, and the mom is facing potential charges that could land her in prison, if I'm reading all this correctly.
Yeah, because there's bribery and other charges that are pretty serious. And I guess for me, one of the difficult things is to understand is why they were so upset or obsessed in getting into one specific school. So, for instance, USC, and it's a great school, awesome campus, but I feel that if you are even a regular average rich student with all of the resources and the education and support that you receive, you will be able to get into other schools. Um, right? So maybe not USC, but I don't know, Stanford or whatever other prestigious school. Um, there's so many, right? So my my question is why were they just so focused on getting on this particular school, and why weren't they? And I think that's the that's the problem with it, is that instead of doing what many of us did was, okay, I'll apply to these number of schools, and depending on where I get in or how much financial aid I receive, I'll go. Uh, but they just seem to want to be very set. No, I want to go to USC, or I want to go to this particular school, and I need to do everything in my power to make sure that my my kid gets into it.
Brown University here, by the way, number 14.
Mm.
I'm looking for the ranking for USC because I was reading that they have done a major push in the last 15 to 20 years to try to change their reputation, to try to change the USC here. I grew up in Southern California, and you always knew it as the University of Spoiled Children. There's
That's UCLA, by the way.
they call UCLA that as well. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at UCLA. Sorry, I was looking for just Southern University of California. It's not even here yet. I think the page is loading automatically. That's why, so I have to go. Yeah, it is. Sorry. So it's number 7, number 22,
Hmm.
and it attracts a lot of foreign students also from China. I've heard, and these are my Chinese friends. This isn't me saying it, but they joke around. They jokes calling it the University of Southern Chinese also,
Hmm.
and it's had those reputations. But in the last 15 years, what I was reading is that they made a strong push for raising fundraising more money, for improving their facilities, and then you have the athletic team. So for someone that is navigating the world of universities right now in entrance, USC might have a higher appeal than it did when we were going to school,
Hmm.
because we may have been comparing it to the schools that you mentioned, like Harvard, MIT, Brown. But now it does have a certain allure to it and reputation, to the point where parents are trying to take these desperate measures just to get their kids to a school with name recognition. And what you said in the beginning, which was to the general question of what's pushing the parents to go to these lengths just to go to these schools, because there's so many other schools that are great. And especially if you're going to do a master's program or a postgraduate program, the where you do your undergraduate program is really not as important as what the grades are, and ultimately where you're going to get your master's or whatever post undergrad degree you're going to get.
Hmm.
And part of it might be the I've heard some people talking about the culture in the United States, where these days everyone goes to college now. Like every single person, or at least they want to make it more accessible so that as many people as possible apply. You even have things like the common application. So
Hmm.
you have tons of people applying to all these universities. And you can imagine now also applying online makes it a lot easier for kids that would have otherwise not applied before. They would have applied to a few schools. And then if they had to go through a whole lengthy process to apply to a different school, then they would have limited the amount of schools that they applied. But these days, you can imagine if a kid is applying to Harvard, you know that they're going to be applying to all of the top schools as well. If Harvard is their number one choice, then all the other schools are going to be. Some of them will be safety schools, and even USC might still be considered a safety school by some of those that are trying to get to the. If they have their ranking, if this is number 22, then at some point it becomes a safe school. But they receive so many in applications, and they only accept a very small percentage of them, so it's extremely competitive. And at least the this daughter of the actress from Full House, I'm going to assume that says since they're celebrities, they live here in LA, so they
Hmm.
she wanted to stay local, at least for her, because I can't speak to the others. What are your thoughts on beyond that?
Well, I just think it's interesting because actually, the last couple of years, I volunteer for a program that focused on helping high school students get into college, and it's sort of for me, it was a great introduction to and sort of helped me remember those days when I was applying to college, but also introduced me to the California student, right? And I think students in California here are very, in many respects, very lucky because you have a good number of schools here locally, both in the Southern California area, up north, and I feel like a lot of because of the weather, because of family ties, etc. People do want to stay close to to their families or here in California. And there were so many students that I know that if they were applying to out of state schools, I would think they would have a great chance to get in because they were mostly Latino from California, and obviously there's not a lot of them that make it out to the East Coast or the Heartland. So they actually, there are schools out there that would actually want to make sure that those type of students come in, so that way they diversify their applicant pool and their student pool. I think for me, and getting it a little bit into my own personal experience, I think, I did not know Brown was an Ivy League institution until I got in and until I saw the people's responses, right? And then I actually, when I learned that both the valedictorian and salutatorian had applied and they didn't get in, right? So from then, there was dealing with the stigma. Okay, I got into a really great school and I got into the school perhaps because of affirmative action, or because and obviously you, as a young person, you go through the whole range of emotions, but I do think that there was certain stigma about being an affirmative action, potentially affirmative action student. But then, once you get into a school, you realize that is really what you make of it, and there's so many smart, talented people that may not go to a school like Brown, but who apply themselves, who get the most out of their education. And like you said, they can then apply and go to a more prestigious education school for their graduate degree, and that sets them up for other opportunities. So the point being is that you don't have to be in one of these institutions in order to have a great education.
Yeah, but it's the culture of rankings and competition and
Yeah, and prestige.
in prestige. This list right here itself is a perfect example of that because it gets published each year, and then the parents, the students that are looking to the best schools will go to this list and say, okay, well, here are Here are the bragging rights. Here is the alumni network. Here are the
Yeah.
connections. Here is the chance to, once you graduate, for that diploma to mean something when you're sending resumes, because you send a resume from a Princeton University for whatever job you're applying to, and it's going to get looked at differently than if you went to another school. Even some of the UCs, like a uh, well, I'm not going to name any because I don't want to offend any students, but obviously there's first, and then if I look at some of the schools, even UCLA, it was, what was it, like 17? And then you start talking
Yeah.
about that there's Irvine, there's Riverside, there's UC Santa Barbara. So of course, some schools are going to attract more just because of the prestige. When when you were talking about the feelings of inadequacy and sense of inadequacy is going to school, I think we can try to separate that a bit by, or let's try to separate it a bit, because to some degree, every single freshman that's going to college, or most of them, will feel a bit like that because they don't know what environment they're going into. They make the assumption that everybody else is super brilliant and that maybe they're not cut out for it. Because yeah, you do get a lot of students that have that type of confidence that, yeah, I'm gonna be here and I'm just gonna kill it. I'm gonna ace everything. But most of the students will go through some level of those feelings. And for us, having this whole baggage of affirmative action, of possibly getting accusations that, or looks that, yeah, you look dark skinned and maybe you're not here, or you have to prove yourself. Whereas when you look at uh, at a non, or when you look at a white person, they don't have at least that additional baggage of having to prove themselves just based on how they look. You know that
Yeah.
especially black people, Latinos, and maybe maybe not as much for other minorities. Though. Definitely Asians and Indians. I know that they're looked at differently. So maybe I shouldn't speak so openly about the skin color, at least for Latinos, because sometimes it's hard to tell a Latino from Indians. You have to be either Indian or Latino to really know what to look for. But
Yeah.
let me, sorry, let me
No, go
get to
ahead.
the
Finish your
point of
thought.
what I was trying to say. I did feel a little bit like that when I got into Brown, but I think for me, it may have been more that natural process of going to a new environment and having to compete. Because I always knew, okay, when I was pretty good in high school, but I knew that once I got to college, it was going to be at a whole different level, and I needed to make sure that I was ready as much as I could. But then I got to college, and remember we took this calculus class freshman year, and the son of a huge company, I forget if it was, it's a technology company, but it was a pretty well-known company, I remember at the time. He failed the first test. And when I
Wow.
saw that, I was like, oh, all right. So it's hard to describe it, but it shattered a lot of misconceptions that I had.
Yeah.
And I think having experienced that my freshman year, it was good because I saw, okay, now this is the playing field. If these are the people, or if these people are struggling too, then it's not just me.
Yeah.
And I'm game because all I have to do is work hard and study hard, just like they do. Because apparently,
Hmm.
coming from wealth doesn't guarantee you anything. But he may have been one of those students that got in as a result of these type of bribery too. You never know.
That's right. No, that's right. And I think as you were talking, what came up for me at yes, there's a lot of the conversation about being a person of color in in an environment on campus where the majority are still white and rich, and there's definitely the culture shock. But I think the other piece is being a first generation college student versus not being one. Um, and I think when your parents or people around you have already gone to college, when you sort of been around an environment where that's the normal, or where you learn things about, oh yeah, your freshman year, this is what to expect and this is what you should do. I think there's a lot of um, capital, social capital, that comes with coming from a family who has gone to college, or who can tell you, give you a heads up of what to expect. And the other piece is, I know some students do go to boarding schools and other type of institutions that prepare them for the college experience because they've already been away from their families. They're accustomed to more challenging curriculum, etc. So I think, to your point, I think that each every college freshman does go through their own personal experience adjusting to college. It's just that if you're a first generation student who hasn't really done it, I think it just seems like it's a little steeper hill to climb. But to your point, I think that once you find your groove, I think you realize that that you can survive there. And I do, one of the things that I do appreciate from Brown was that they do offer their supports for students who may be struggling academically or socially, and it's just a matter of accessing them. And right, and as a first generation student, as a Latino male, it took me a while to feel comfortable with the concept of asking for help. And part of it too was because before, in high school, I didn't have to ask for help. I was able to excel in my academics by not doing by I didn't struggle, right? So when I got to Brown was the really first time that I struggled, and then is when a lot of the questioning, do I belong here, do I not? So I think the fact that you and I were part of that you and I were in the same boat when it came to mathematics, to the calculus class, and seeking those resources. And I was okay. Well, I need to take advantage of this. This is natural. This is part of the adjustment to college. And then also realizing that I also brought many other things to the campus, my experience, my perspective, my dedication and commitment to making the campus community a little better.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about affirmative action that people overlook, isn't it? And that once the students are there, if you give them the resources and the students have the ability to take advantage of those resources, they're gonna be fine in college. They're gonna succeed. I'm sure you still have small number of students that end up dropping out, but that might be the same across different groups. You're not seeing a ton of Latinos or African Americans dropping out of colleges at a disproportionate rate,
Hmm.
especially the colleges like Brown University, Harvard. Once admitted, if the resources are there and the students are able to take advantage of them, if even if you come from an environment where you're a little bit behind, say on language or even math, you're gonna catch up. And I remember for us, yeah, it was a little tough to ask for. Well, I don't remember actually. It's hard for me to say. I do know that if I look back on it, there's no way that we were going to be able to pass that class with that professor because we couldn't understand the word that he was saying. And remember
Hmm.
the Russian with the really thick accent? I doubt anyone in that class really understood or was able to follow along. I remember when we went to the TA hours, which were great because the TA was actually a way better teacher than the
I
professor.
remember him.
Yeah, so it made a lot more sense to go to TA hours and say, "Hey, I got lost halfway through his explanation of this. Like, what's going on here?" And then he'd do a great way of explaining it, and you're like, "Oh, okay." And I remember towards the end of the class too, we were able to study on our own and not necessarily rely on it as much. But also during the TA hours, we saw that it wasn't just us; it was a ton of the students from the class going to his TA, and it wasn't even just that class; it was every single class. Those support groups are there, those resources are there, which are the resources that a lot of the students lack that come from other communities where they don't have access to tutoring like that, where they don't have access to the wealth and even to the better schools. And another point about affirmative action, because I don't want to get too much into it because we can spend hours talking about affirmative action, but all the critics of affirmative action, the ones that are always trying to shut it down and trying to dismantle it, they never give you a solution. Affirmative action is
Hmm.
supposed to be a solution to an acknowledgement that for a long time a specific segment of our society has benefited from the wealth accumulation, generational wealth accumulation of the based on how the systems in this country were founded, which you have the white Europeans coming, taking the best land, taking the best resources, building wealth off of the backs of people, stealing land, and then not all of them obviously, but you start setting up structures and systems so that you can help your own kind. Perfect example is housing, because we all know that housing has always traditionally discriminated, and they have what is called redlining, where they wouldn't allow, or banks wouldn't give mortgages to African Americans in certain neighborhoods. Yeah, maybe government subsidies wouldn't you wouldn't be as you wouldn't readily receive government subsidies if you were a black farmer or a white farmer, even though the subsidies or the government programs are supposed to be race blind. So you've always had that institutionalized system that has favored a specific group over others. And affirmative action is an acknowledgement of that, and it's saying we understand that some students, or some, because of the disadvantaged communities that they're coming from, they're already maybe coming at a disadvantage, and that's why when they take a test, that's why their results may be 11, 1200. It doesn't necessarily mean that these students are not capable of performing in the elite universities. It's just that they started the race way behind at a
Or
disadvantage.
you know,
Good.
or also because the test is not based on things that apply to them, right? So it's based on a very privileged or particular type of background and not so much something that they can relate to.
Yeah. And with the test, and with the holistic view of students, what they're saying is, okay, this student may have had a 1200, but let's look at these students. Let's look at their circumstances. Where did they grow up? Oh, what kind of things have they gone through in life? Oh my God, this student came with his parents when he was 9, 10 years old, and they were living in a single apartment, and like all these factors that start coming in, and it shows the grit and the
Hmm.
determination of the student. And you can tell right away, that's an indication that's going to say this student will be able to succeed in the university. And that's the whole point of something like programs like affirmative action, that they want to not only it's a long-term strategy also, because you don't see immediate results. The hope of affirmative action is that you start allowing these students to get into the elite universities and to get access to this type of education, not only to show that they can do it, but also so that they can come back to their communities and be contributing members, so that people like you and me can start setting up counseling programs, after school programs, so that students are no longer starting from behind when they get to college, so that we can help our own community catch up. And because that's what happens with every other community. It's just that with Latinos, we're in the process of doing that too. So that's the point of affirmative action, is not to kick somebody out and take away their spot and give it to somebody else just because they look a different way. It's beyond that. It's a whole. It's more involved than that, and the vision is longer term, and it is the right approach, because these people that are always knocking on it, what's their solution? Well, their solution is to not even acknowledge
Hmm.
the history and the generation, and the fact that if you grow up in the ghetto, that you're not going to have the same advantages because the libraries are closed Monday and Tuesday, or a few days a week, because the transportation system's not the same, because the government was pushing drugs into your community in the 80s, and that in itself destroyed any sense of like community, and like all these things, right? They don't acknowledge any of that. They just want to say, well, these kids, they want free things, and they want to get into college because of the way they look. I'm like, okay, fine, criticize it all you want, but give me a solution that acknowledges the reality, and that you're actually trying to come up with a system that helps everyone and gets us to a
Yeah.
better place.
Yeah, and I think this is part of the infuriating aspect of this scandal, because on one hand you have people who are trying to dismantle affirmative action, saying that it's unfair for the current generation of white students who are trying to get into some of these institutions. And then on the other hand, you have this scheme and proof that there's a system and that wealthy people are doing this type of scheming, bribing to get their kids into these institutions. Um, so I think that's part of it was infuriating, right? You feel like, and one on one hand, you're trying to dismantle the one of the few ways that we can address all of the historical injustices that you just mentioned, and then, but on the other hand, you sort of have your own private affirmative action uh, program that you can afford because you are rich and white and trying to preserve that type of privilege to you. And I think for me, the other piece is that education is a great equalizer. So to your point that you were in a class where somebody from a privileged background also struggled with math. I mean, that was part of the great thing about being in college to a great extent, right? You were all there as students. You were um, pursuing your interests. You were struggling together. You were excelling together. You were doing things beyond the academics, so dancing or sports or radio shows, whatever it was. And I think that it also gave us an opportunity to interact with that whole new world, but also for that whole new world to interact with us and to learn from our perspective, to learn from our experiences. And I think that one of the things about educations and being educated is being able to know and deal with people from different backgrounds and realize that not everyone from this particular demographic is like that they have a very specific or that they have very unique stories that are helpful for me to understand because that helps me figure out what my place is within this broader society with this broader world. But I think that that this scandal has provided an opportunity to do a lot of good thinking and dialogue about education and how do we continue to preserve the system that we have and to help it address some of those injustices from the past.
I call it selective outrage. And this is a perfect example of it because it's usually applied by individuals that want to focus on a specific, they want to put the lens into a specific part of an issue without acknowledging or without making an effort to see the bigger picture. And that selective outrage is what's happening, again, what happens with affirmative action, and yet no, not a peep about what you mentioned, which is the legacy admission process. You know that if you donate, and I'm not even singling out one particular university, this is true for all universities. If I donate over $1 million or $10 million, if I had that money, and I donated it to my school, don't you think then if my kids applied to that school, do you think that they would have a better chance of getting in or that they would not have a good chance? And
Very
I
good
think
chance.
we all know that if you give a ton of money to a school, you have a pretty good chance of having your kids get in there. And that's all we people have always known that. To what extent the percentage of kids that get in that way, I'm not sure, but it's always happened. We've always known about it. And I was mentioning earlier also the athletics programs because athletics is extremely competitive because it brings in a ton of money for the schools,
Hmm.
the athletic departments, and you know that they're doing it too. They're trying to get as creative as possible. Um, what is it? Balancing themselves between that fine line of what's legal and what's not, and walking back, crossing it, and coming back, and so forth, so that they can get the best athletes, even though these athletes may not have the grades to be able to to be able to pass these classes. And you know that in most schools, it's usually the athletes that struggle the most. And again, that's because that culture probably started since high school, where the athletes were passing classes just because they were so important to the teams. And it could be, I'm not singling out a particular type of athlete, but I remember even at Brown, whereas you had Latino students that may have been taking sociology and they were struggling maybe to catch up with the reading, or even in my case, I had a bit of an accent when I was in college, and that made me a little self-conscious. And you have those type of things. But even us, we were there. We needed to do a little bit of more catching up to do on ourselves, extra studying, and but we were competing with the rest of the students. But then you had the athletes that were way behind. And I remember that because I took science and I took math classes and computer science and so forth. And whereas we started in calculus, some of the athletes were taking intro to math, stuff that I was tutoring them at. And I remember tutoring one guy that I knew, and it was simple math stuff that I knew even since high school. And so the schools have always been doing this. It's always happened. I don't know to what extent, and I'm not surprised that this happened. I am
Yeah.
surprised that they went through the length of actually faking tests. But I don't think this is the first time that it happened because I don't think this is how things work. This has been happening for a long time. And the only reason why we're finding out about it is precisely because it's been happening for a long time. Because think about it, it works like this in any other field. Like let's say that you're in a relationship and you're unfaithful to your partner once. If you only do it once, you're probably not gonna get caught. If that's the only time that you do it, people get caught because they keep doing it. Same thing here. It's been happening for a long time. Same schools, other schools they've been doing, and they finally got caught. And I was gonna say something else about what was it? Oh, about the selective outrage about affirmative action and about the privilege of the wealthy. Um, hmm, I lost my thought. Come back to me in a few
Okay.
seconds. Yeah, I lost my
And I
train of
think
thought.
real quickly, I think to the defense of some of the college athletes, I think is, being a college athlete is super hard. And I think part of the reason that academics are tough for them is because of their schedules, right? So their focus is more on the training, um, and the travel. So I think for the somewhat for the athletes themselves is really hard, right? Because their focus is performing and excelling at their particular sport, and most of them do focus on their academics, and they get tutors, and they do a lot of the work when they go in to meet or competitions and things like that. So I also just want to acknowledge that part of, there's a system that relies on the athletes for both prestige, and as we get ready to start March Madness, that on their athletic prodness to fund their athletic systems, and they don't get compensated. So I think um, that my hat off to the student athletes. I think to your point, yes, there's some that struggle, but I think for the most part they're trying to do just that, be a student athlete, and be able to excel at both things that they're at college to
Yeah,
do.
and thanks for mentioning that because it's important to acknowledge that I wasn't trying to say because I never make the case that a certain type of individual that they naturally can or cannot perform somewhere. What you're saying about the athletes is a perfect example. The resources are there in the university, but they don't have a way to get to them because,
Hmm.
like you said, their schedule. I remember these athletes. They're up in the morning. They're training. They come. I remember we used to see them at the cafeteria, and then they go to practice afterwards, and then they have to throw in studying, and then practice again, and then not even uh, considering how that may affect them as well. The fact that they're always practicing, whether that takes a toll on them too, on their physical.
Yeah, travel under the
Yeah.
weekends.
And so these athletes, I'm sure they're smart individuals. They just, the system that is set up is stacked against them because they don't have as much time as me and you would have had to go and access tutoring or any other student. And so, same thing in high school, because again, in high school, they have these strict schedules. And if that's their focus, if that's what they have committed to being the best at, because that this is they're extremely skilled at something in particular, and they're really good at it, it takes away from their time to be able to devote to other things. And if the universities have these like strict schedules as well, it makes it even harder. So yeah, so these students, if they had the time, and maybe the ones that are able to excel and even graduate with honors and so forth, are the ones that have extreme discipline for managing their schedules, and they have
Hmm.
extreme resiliency. Because you can imagine for an 18-year-old, even for 18-year-old, even for athletes, I'm sure it's still hard because of that strict schedule that they have. I know that I had really bad time management skills.
Yeah,
So even that
same here.
they have that above us too. But yeah, again, because they have to devote so much time to to the athletics, it takes away from their ability to focus on others and to catch up. And what I wanted to mention earlier when I lost my train of thought was going back to affirmative action, that I understand that it's not a perfect system. And the criticism of it, there is legitimate criticism. For example, if you have, say you have students that come in, maybe in my case, someone from my school that comes in like me, and we are at let's say we went into that calculus class, and there were enough of us, like a quarter of us, that were not at the level of everyone else. And I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying that hypothetically, this is what's happening in classrooms. So we go in and we're not at that level, and we start asking questions that force the teacher to slow down and have to backtrack a little bit and teach to us the things that we haven't learned because we didn't learn them in high school. And that does affect everyone else in that class. But nobody really talks about, well, to what degree did it affect them that they had to slow down a bit, and how is that going to affect their ability to continue in the school and so forth. But again, that is a downside of it, and that is one of the arguments that they always make, that yeah, you do have those situations where you have to slow down to teach the kids that need to learn the stuff that they haven't learned yet. But again, okay, you have to weigh the pros and the cons, because this isn't a perfect solution. You have to look at the benefits and look at some of the drawbacks. How massive, how big of an inconvenience really is this, really enough to try to dismantle an entire program? And also, if that's the criticism, then what's the alternative? What's the solution? Because again, when you ask, if somebody's ever criticizing affirmative action, you ask them for a solution, they're either not going to have one, or they're going to go to the extremes and they're going to say everything should be on merit. Oh, merit based. If the student has the grades, then they get to go into the university. But then you can ask them, okay, well, that's dismissing everything that we just discussed. You're not acknowledging anything about the past. You're not acknowledging the situation. You just want to pretend like today in the United States, everyone is born with the same opportunities. And if they're not born with those opportunities, it's because of their fault or because of their family's fault. You don't want to acknowledge, you don't want to take any culpability for the fact that the system has been set up stacked against them. And if you're not even willing to acknowledge and entertain those things, then you're not addressing the real problem to me. And sometimes I get into discussions with people about this and I bring up those points. I don't get any
Yeah.
answers because obviously they don't have any.
No, it's interesting because when I went into Brown, I wanted to be an engineer, and I remember the first engineering class. Apart from being a massive auditorium class, the first time I had been in such a setting, I know they were starting to talk about vectors, and I was like, "Vectors? What the hell is that? We didn't cover this in my high school." So to your point that uh, yes, there's some consideration needs to be given to people who may not have the academic background. But to your point, I think that one option, and I think this could have happened, I could have been, okay, I don't know what vectors are, but what resources are there that I can use to learn more about what vectors are and catch up to what the rest of the class has already a baseline for. So I think that you're right. I think there's not a perfect solution, but I think this is part of the one of the great things, and this has actually happened at Brown and many other schools. There's now centers for first generation students where things that you and I talked about and benefit from, because I do remember that one of the reasons I was able to stay at Brown was because of the help and support of some of the upperclassmen who share their story, who who even just talk to us socially and say, hey, you know, how are you doing? Oh, by the way, if you take a class in this department, you should really take it with this teacher. So is that kind of support and network that made a difference for me. But I think the solution is not just don't let those kids be in those classes, is let those kids be in those classes, but provide them the resources they need to get caught up, so that way you are bringing the knowledge base to the same level.
Yeah, possibly because I gravitated towards the sciences, because I ended up doing computer science, and I may have gone to that degree also because I acknowledged that was my strength. I went towards what I was good at,
Yeah.
and I remember the intro to computer science. Well, they were I had I thought I knew what technology was because I in high school I was good with programs. I was good with computers, with using them, with navigating them. So you that's a very simplistic that's a very simplistic um, way of describing or portraying somebody's proficiency in like at least from computers, going from the proficiency of computers to then mixing that in with computer science and saying, oh yeah, we knew he was going to do computer science because he was always good with computers. Completely unrelated things, and they're always simplified. And I still hear people say those things that yeah, because he's good with computers, he went and did computer science. It has nothing to do with it. Computer science is a whole different beast, and I was the class was about 100 students, and there were a ton of us that were trying out computer science for the first time. So during those extra sessions for tutoring or getting caught up, it was me and it was white kids and Indian kids and Asian kids, and so I never felt like I was alone because it wasn't in some of that baggage, a little bit of that baggage. I didn't really have to deal with it because I understood from the very beginning that I was competing with a lot of kids that had prior experience because they had been programming in high school, they had been programming before, and it's just a matter of understanding. I mean, we all had the fundamentals, we all had the mathematics behind it, and we all knew enough to start computer programming, but you need a lot of hands-on experience with it to really understand it. And I remember I did use a lot of the tutoring the freshman year, but by the time I got to was it by the time I got to my sophomore year, I was able to become a TA, a teaching assistant, so that I could help other students that were coming in. So that first year, I did hit a wall, and it was a slow learning curve. But that was, again, like that's the experience for a lot of students because a lot of kids end up dropping out of computer science because they find it really hard. And I always said that it's really not as hard as people make it seem. It's more about there's other qualities that come into play that people don't really talk about a lot. Patience, having the tenacity and persevering,
Persistence, yeah.
persistence, and just being determined to say there's a problem in front of me, and then you have to solve it. And I'd become obsessed with solving these problems, and you know me, I'm the type of guy that's always something in his mind. I might be trying to solve a problem,
Mm-hmm.
even if I'm so. A lot of those qualities played in, and they helped me, and they had nothing to do with anything that I learned in high school. They had more to do with maybe stuff that I picked up along the way, but definitely stuff that you can measure in a test. And so yeah, so it was a slightly different experience, but again, it's because the resources are there, and I had ability to access them, and I had an ability to internalize what was going on and realize that okay, here I am, and here I am with all these other students. We're all in the same boat. So now it's just a matter of how do I take advantage of the resources and how to apply myself to do that.
Yeah. And I know part of what you wanted to end with today was some reflections on what happens next. And I know you recently had a baby boy. So are you thinking about paying lots of money to get him to the school that you really want him to attend?
No, I want to take him. I want to take him to Mexico when he's 11, so he can start plucking beans from the fields.
Nice.
Because I do want. Look, by the time you get to high school, if you're paying for those uh, SAT prep classes, I don't know how effective they are. The work of getting somebody to a good school starts from the time that they're 3 or 4. And also, I'm not saying you have to be a helicopter parent that's always on them, not letting them have any fun. But a lot of what he needs, he's gonna get as a result of just naturally being in this family, because
Yeah,
through me he's going to get exposed to reading, he's going to get exposed to tutoring, to math, he's going to get exposed to so many things that by the time he gets to college he should be in a good place to compete, because I know there's brilliant kids everywhere. So I just want to put him at the when the race starts, he just has to be in a good place to be able to compete, and he's going to get through that naturally as a result of how I plan on bringing him up. Because, and again, and we talked about this earlier too, it's our job also to help out our community as well, to come back and give to the community in any way we can. And at least for us, maybe part of it is the reason why we do this podcast too, because we feel like we have something to say, and we're hoping that somebody's out there listening to this podcast that comes from a similar background as us, so that they can get motivated, and maybe if they can relate to us and so forth, somehow doing something to give back, so that we can try to equalize things for our community in the long term.
that's right. And I think that's a beautiful sentiment to end our conversation on today. We definitely want to thank those of you who listened to our conversation. Um, Please stay tuned for additional podcasts. And that was your Brown perspective on the elite college scandal.